Good evening and welcome to Paradigm Shift, Redefining Our Perception of Religion. Tonight we're going to talk about a groundbreaking approach to religion. Many people think of religion as incompatible with critical thinking, but it's the Rebbe's approach to religion and leadership that inspires us to realize that not only is there room for critical thinking within religion, it is absolutely vital to the proper performance of religion. In fact, if you're not using critical thinking, if you're surrendering your intelligence in favor of your religion, you're just not doing it right. I'm Rabbi David Vigler of Chabad of Palm Beach Gardens, and I'm happy to be here tonight teaching this course, Paradigm Shift. We're up to Lesson 4, an independent unit of 6 transformational ideas by the Lubavitcher Rebbe, 6 gifts of wisdom that the Rebbe gave to our generation. Whilst in the previous 3 lessons, we spoke about 3 big ideas that the Rebbe brought to the world. Tonight we're going to be talking about the Rebbe, the movement, and his leadership as a microcosm to our relationship with God and how the Rebbe teaches us how we are supposed to relate to God, not by surrendering our intelligence, but on the contrary, using problem solving and brainstorming, using our minds in the service of our religion. Today is 2020. We are 26 years after the passing of the Rebbe on the 3rd of Tammuz, when many critics, independent thinkers, felt that this was the end of the Chabad Lubavitch movement. In famous articles from the Los Angeles Times and other places, they felt that once the Rebbe was no longer on this earth, there was no hope for the Chabad movement. But time has shown us otherwise. In another article from National Geographic, printed in 2006, the article reads as follows: now headquartered in Crown Heights, Brooklyn, the group was relatively small and little known when Rabbi Schneerson became Rebbe in 1951. During his 43-year tenure, he pioneered a system of shluchim, or emissaries, charged with going out into the world to open Chabad centers, spreading knowledge of Torah and Judaism. Some feared that the Lubavitch movement would dwindle after the Rebbe's death in 1994, but today there are more than 3,000 centers in 70 countries, nearly half of them founded after Rabbi Schneerson's passing. These critics assumed that Chabad was all about the charisma of our Rebbe, but they were so incredibly wrong. This all comes together in a powerful conversation between a Reform rabbi and the Rebbe, which speaks to the essence of the Rebbe's leadership. The Rebbe's response to this Reform rabbi is going to be the subject and the content of tonight's discussion. It is our analysis of the Rebbe's profound response to the Reform rabbi about the nature of Chabad leadership that gives us a transformational perception on how we can approach our faith and what room we have for critical thinking, for brainstorming, for problem solving within our religion. It all started when Herbert Wiener, a famous author and Reform rabbi, asked this question to the Rebbe in a private audience. And I read from his book, 9.5 Mystics. I remembered, quote, that this was my last chance and resolve to ask even the most embarrassing questions in an effort to solve the enigma of Chabad Lubavitch. I explained to the Rebbe that more than a year had passed since I began trying to understand the movement, and that I'd come to him now with a confession. I did not understand. Would he mind if I started this interview by asking him about the character of a chassid? Rabbi Menachem Mendel smiled and told me to go ahead. As before, I could speak in English, but he would answer in Yiddish. And here's the question. Isn't the fact that Hasidim turn to the Rebbe for almost every decision in their lives, isn't this a sign of weakness? A repudiation of the very thing that makes a man human, his bechira, his freedom of will. This was the question posed to the Rebbe by the Reform rabbi. Aren't Hasidim too devoted to the Rebbe? It seems like they've lost their self-analysis It looks like they turn to the Rebbe for every question, like they idolize and turn to the Rebbe for everything without using their own brains. Isn't that a dismissal of our most choicest gift, which is our intellect? And he continues, the Rebbe's answer came without hesitation, as if he had dealt with the question before. A weak person, said the Rebbe, is usually overcome by the environment in which he finds himself. But our Hasidim can be sent into any environment, no matter how strange or hostile, and they maintain themselves within it. So how can we say that it is a weakness which characterizes a Hasid? This, my friends, is the Rebbe's response. You ask about Hasidim being weak because they turn to the Rebbe for advice in all matters? They don't think for themselves? My answer to you is that they're not weak, because you see that the accomplishments that they make, they're not influenced by their environment. They influence their very inhospitable, unspiritual environments by bringing great achievements to their environments. Clearly, they are not weak. Clearly, they are strong. And I want you to think about the Rebbe's answer for a moment. Did the Rebbe really answer this question? Or did the Rebbe perhaps deflect from answering this question? I'm Rabbi David Vigler from Chabad Palm Beach Gardens. And tonight, this is going to be the theme of our conversation. By understanding how the Rebbe responded to the Reform Rabbi, the profundity, the wisdom, the dignity of this response teaches us volumes about the nature of leadership, and indeed, how much the Rebbe believed in each and every one of us, and the nature of our relationship with God, what it is and where it should be. I encourage you to follow my classes at facebook.com/Jewish Gardens. That's facebook.com/Jewish Gardens, or youtube.com/Jewish Gardens. That's youtube.com/Jewish Gardens. Feel free to send me an email to rabbi@jewishgardens.com. That's rabbi@jewishgardens.com. When it came to the Rebbe's leadership, when it came to the Rebbe's followers, it gives me great pleasure to share with you a very short clip from one of the most celebrated Jews today. He's the former chief rabbi of the British Commonwealth, Chief Rabbi Jonathan Sachs of London, England, right here.
What I saw in the Lubavitcher Rebbe was this, that other Jewish leaders that I've met created followers. The Lubavitcher Rebbe created leaders.
A profound perception of the Rebbe's leadership, that the Rebbe didn't create followers. The Rebbe created leaders, and we hear a hint of that in the strength of character that the Rebbe speaks of his Hasidim, of his followers, in his response to Herbert Wiener. And that's going to be the subject of our conversation tonight. The nature of leadership, and indeed our entire relationship with God, how God wants us to relate to him. You know, in a lighthearted moment, the story goes about Prime Minister Golda Meir, who said to President Richard Nixon that if you think you've got a hard job, I've got a much more difficult job. You are president over 250 million Americans, but I, as Prime Minister of Israel, I'm Prime Minister over 5 million prime ministers. And that is far more complicated. You know, every Israeli, every Jew feels that they own the place, that they know the solutions, that they're the president, they're the prime minister. It's a much more difficult job being Prime Minister of Israel than it is being president of the United States of America. And here's the question tonight. Is a chassid a mindless follower? Or is there much more depth than meets the eye? I'd like to expand this question by broadening the horizons from the relationship between a chassid and our Rebbe to our relationship with God in general. Is religion in general a rejection of rational thinking? Or are the two compatible? What is an ideal Jew? Is an ideal Jew one who has no questions because he feels no need to question, he's surrendered his intelligence to God? Or is maybe an ideal Jew one who has questions but obeys nonetheless, despite his challenges? Or is maybe a third paradigm, one whose obedience of God's will is accompanied by an understanding of and an appreciation for the reasons for God's command? An interesting question to ponder. When we look at the response of the Jewish people to God at Mount Sinai when we first accepted our mission statement as Jews, we find a very curious response. Do you want to receive the Torah? The Jewish people responded with two fascinating words. Two words that shaped the mission of our nation, and indeed, two words that hold the secret to our successful relationship with God, as we'll be discussing. The words that they responded to God were as follows. I'm quoting from Exodus. Moses came from atop Mount Sinai and he told the nation all of God's words. The people responded. All the commands that God spoke, Na'aseh, we will do, Venishma, and we will understand. We will do, we'll follow the rules, and we will understand, we will comprehend. First we will do, then we will understand. Interesting. It's very interesting that they needed to give two words and not one word. Shouldn't it have been enough for the Jewish people to simply state, we'll do, yes. Do you want the Torah? The answer is yes. Instead of just saying yes, they said yes, and then we will try to intellectually comprehend, to fathom the reasoning behind what we're doing. God expresses surprise, according to the Medrash, that his children had accessed his secret, quote from the Medrash, and proceeds to endow each Jew with two crowns. Let's look at this Medrash. The Talmud states, when the Jews preceded, when they preceded, we will do, to we will understand, 60 myriads of ministering angels came and placed two crowns upon each and every Jew, one corresponding to their first statement, we will do, and the other corresponding to we will understand. Let's think about this a moment. Why did they need two crowns? Wasn't it enough for them just to say, yes, sir, aye, captain, we will do exactly what you want us to do, and that's it? It seems to imply the fact that they got not one but two crowns seems to make it very clear that there is merit not only to surrendering our will before God, but that there's also merit to we will understand, to critical thinking. And that's why they received two crowns. It seems apparent from this encounter at Sinai, the two crowns given to each Jew, that it's not enough for us just to surrender our will before God, but that critical thinking, understanding, and reasoning is vital to our commitment to God. And that's the big question of tonight. How can critical thinking be compatible with religion? What room is there for a thinker when it comes to our relationship with God? Doesn't God just want us to do as we're told? Does God really want us to think and to understand? Does it matter to God that we should think and understand? Let's take a look at a case study, a biblical case study that sheds light upon this enigma. As the Jewish people had just exited the persecution and slavery in Egypt, and they were at the threshold of the promised land. We read this Torah portion just a few weeks ago when Moses is preparing to conquer the promised land, and the Jewish people proposed that they send spies to scout the land. Like any other enigma that Moses ever had, he turned to God. Should we or should we not send spies? And God's response is stunning. God pleads the fifth, and he says, I'm not telling you what to do. I'm not telling you to send, and I'm not telling you not to send. You do what you understand. I am not commanding you to do so, to send them. Now I want you to think about this a moment. What would you do if you were Moses and you had just asked God, should we send spies to scout the land that you promised us we will conquer or not? And God says, I'm not telling you what to do. I think that'd be pretty clear that That's pretty much a no. But Moses proceeds to send 12 spies, one from each tribe, and the results were catastrophic. 10 of the spies came back with a very negative report in the land. Only 2 of the spies came with a positive response. And the 10 spies managed to lead the people into rebellion, into mutiny against Moses and against God. It was as a result of this encounter that the Jewish people were given the decree that they were not going to be entering the promised land. This generation was going to die out in the desert. It was only their children that would enter the promised land. The results were catastrophic. Maybe in retrospect, Moses should not have sent these spies. So why did he send them in the first place? Why didn't Moses get the hint and realize that the spies should never have been sent? The question is even strengthened when we hear that Joshua, Moses' successor, when he becomes leader of Israel, one of the very first things that he does is to prepare to conquer the city of Jericho. And despite the fact that Joshua was one of those 12 spies of Moses, who experienced and saw for himself the disaster which the first 12 spies was, he proceeds to send 2 spies of his own. He doesn't even ask God. He sends 2 spies of his own to scout out the city of Jericho before he proceeds to conquer it. Clearly, sending spies was something that Moses and Joshua thought was a good idea. But why? Why did they think that this was a good idea? Why would God have declined from giving them any instruction and any guidance? Didn't they realize that God's silence was more than likely an indication of his reluctance, that he didn't want the spies to be sent? And here we encounter a revolutionary analysis from the Rebbe, something that transforms our perception of our relationship with God and the place that we have for our critical thinking in our relationship with God. The Rebbe explains what Moses was thinking. He explains that there's actually 2 ways that we can relate to God. One is a way of surrendering our intellect, and another way is a way of merging our understanding with with the way that God understands it. We can either turn off our intelligence, or we can turn it on and sync it with God. It's the Ethics of the Fathers that introduces us to these 2 approaches. In Ethics of the Fathers, chapter 2, it reads as follows. It gives us 2 directives. Make his will into your will. Make God's will your will. And then a second statement, nullify your will before God's will. We have 2 approaches here to God. The second approach is surrendering, nullifying our will before God. Turning off our brain and just doing whatever God says. Yes, sir, aye, Captain, no problem, consider it done. But a deeper and higher level of relating to God, preceding that of nullifying and surrendering, is make his will your will. Not surrendering your intelligence, but optimizing your intelligence to mesh with the understanding of God. The moment that Moses asked God whether he should send spies, and God says, I'm not going to tell you what to do. I want you to make your decision if you wish you should send. It was at this moment that Moses realized that God was allowing him to step it up, allowing the Jewish people to mature our relationship with God from one of no intelligence, of surrendered intelligence, to one of enmeshed intelligence, to one of synchronicity with God's understanding, where our understanding meshes and synchronizes with that of God. And here it is in the Rebbe's words. Moses was not at all anxious when God told him, send for yourself as per your understanding. I am not commanding you. If you wish, you may send. He wasn't anxious. Why? To the contrary, Moses rejoiced. For he perceived that this directive introduced a new phase. This new and loftier level of divine service is wholly a product of our free will and even lacks the subtle coercion implicit in a directive from God. Rather, the service is completely consistent with our own understanding and wishes, as per our understanding, if you wish, which are completely in sync with the will of God. You see, if God had instructed Moses to send, it would have been without our critical thinking, simply following orders. By not commanding us to send, by asking us to make our own choice whether we should send spies, God was allowing us to strategize the access to the land. He was allowing us to use our intelligence in the service of God to align our understanding with His. You see, when we use our intelligence in the service of God, when we understand not how to do, but why we do a mitzvah, when we don't just do Shabbos, but we understand the meaning behind Shabbos, when we understand the meaning behind tefillin, and the meaning behind the forbidden relationships of marriage, and we understand the power that is achieved and the energy formed and created when we study Torah, then this is no longer an exercise. It now becomes meaningful. Now we are introduced, we're given clarity of purpose, we're given the power to endure obstacles that block our way, and passion to be able to achieve the desired results. When you don't understand why you're doing something, when you're simply following orders, it's much more difficult to have the passion and endurance to overcome challenges and obstacles that stand in your way. You simply don't have the clarity of purpose. When you have an understanding in the mitzvahs of God, it's something that you're able to appreciate. Now you're able to experience intimacy with God's understanding. We're able to appreciate God. It's no longer something which we do. It's something which we actually feel and experience. And that was the elevated state of maturity that God was opening the doors for us as Jewish people to allow us to engage with God in our early stages as a chosen nation, as a people of God. No longer were we obligated to serve God by surrendering our intelligence. Now God was encouraging us to use our intelligence in the service of God. Now there are dangers to this method. As long as you're not using your intelligence, you're going to just follow orders. Just like an ox on a threshing floor who's just following the orders and of the farmer, and he's going along the threshing floor. But when we're using our own intelligence, you might go off the tracks. Your intelligence might guide you in the wrong direction. And that's indeed what happened to the 10 spies. They literally lost the plot. And they came back, instead of reporting the best way how to conquer the land, they came back reporting if they should conquer the land, and they said no. The conclusion that they came to was that the nations of the land of Israel were greater and more powerful than God, and that they weren't able to rise up against them. And indeed, that end was bitter. Not only did the 10 spies suffer a tragic end, but the entire nation, except for the 2 spies, were exiled to wander in the desert for the next 40 years until they died out and the next generation was able to enter the promised land. So notwithstanding the downside of the dangers of critical thinking when it comes to our relationship with God, the benefits outweigh the dangers in that we are able to reach a holistic relationship with God, one in which all of our being is able to relate to God. Not only our hands and our feet, but our minds and our hearts are also able to engage in this relationship with God. Indeed, critical thinking has very much a place in our relationship with God. We're starting to understand the 2-word response that the Jewish people gave to God. We will do, surrender, but we will also understand intelligence. Now, before we explain how this works and the vital components that are necessary in our critical thinking as it pertains to our religion and how the two can coexist in a symbiotic relationship, I'd like to just expand and show that the critical thinking that is necessary and a vital ingredient in our relationship with God is also a vital ingredient in our relationship with our leaders, with our Rebbes. The ethics of the fathers tells us in chapter 4 that we should relate to our teachers with the same reverence that we relate to God. The honor of your student should be as precious to you as your own. The honor of your colleague should be as great as the reverence to your teacher. And the reverence for your teacher should be on a par with your reverence for God. So we can infer from our relationship with God, where we need to have critical thinking, that also in our relationship with our leaders, with our Rebbes, back to Herbert Wiener now, with our Rebbe, we also need to have critical thinking. It's not enough to just follow our leaders. It's necessary also to use our own initiative. The Torah teaches us this idea when the Torah instructs the high priest Aaron, brother of Moses, as to how to light the candles on the menorah, the candelabra in the holy temple. The Torah uses a very unusual word to kindle the lights. Instead of saying that Aaron should kindle the lights, the Torah says, speak to Aaron and say to him, when you cause the flames of the tabernacle lamps to ascend. Instead of saying when you kindle the lamps, which is an easy way to say kindle, when you cause the flames of the tabernacle lamps to ascend, the 7 lamps shall cast their lights toward the face of the menorah. Why would it be that the Torah, which doesn't mince any words, why would the Torah use not an easy word like kindling the lamps, lehadlik et hanirot, instead of uses a very unusual verb to elevate the lamps? Why would you want to be elevating the lamps? Rashi explains because the flame rises, the Torah describes their kindling in the terms of ascending. The one lighting the menorah is required to kindle the lamp until the flame rises by itself. In other words, you've got to make sure that the flame lights on its own. You can't just make sure that it lights as long as the match is there. It's got to be able to light on its own. It's got to be able to ascend on its own. And here the Rebbe sees a powerful metaphor for leadership in the relationship between a Rebbe and his Hasidim, between a rabbi and his students, or any leader for that matter, and his mentees. The Rebbe explains that the flaming candles is a metaphor for students, for souls. A candle is a soul. Like King Solomon says, the candle of God is the soul of man. Ascending candles, lighting candles so that they light themselves, is a metaphor for how we're supposed to teach our students, to the point that they're self-motivated, that they're self-sufficient, that they're able to understand on their own, to the point that even when the teacher's gone and the student is still able to survive and thrive without the presence of the teacher. And here it is in the words of the Rebbe in 1991. God grants us the powers to perform our service of igniting and illuminating ourselves and the world with the light of Torah and mitzvah. In addition, we receive powers from Aaron the high priest, the shepherd of Israel, who ignites the candle of God here in this world. We also receive guidance and inspiration from our parents, educators, and the people with whom we interact. Nevertheless, we cannot suffice for the powers and guidance we receive from God and others, because the ultimate and truest service necessitates us to be flames that rise on our own after we are ignited by others. The light of Torah and mitzvah must permeate us to the extent that we ourselves become independent sources of illumination and no longer require the efforts of a mentor, the one who ignited our flame in the first place, because we have become self-subsistent flames. This, my friends, is the idea, the doctrine of avoda b'koach atzmo, self-motivated divine service. What the Rebbe is teaching us here is that our relationship with God needs to be one in which we ourselves are able to hold our own. You can't just be a student as long as your teacher is present. And once your teacher is absent, then you've lost all direction and inspiration. You've got to be able to be a student who stands on his own 2 feet. The way to do that is using your own intelligence. If you come to shul every Shabbos and you're inspired by the rabbi's sermon, that's wonderful. But what happens when there's a quarantine and you can't hear the rabbi's sermon anymore? Are you still inspired on Shabbos, or are you running on fumes? The kind of inspiration that we have to give our mentees is one where we demand from them self-motivation. Avoda b'koach atzmo, divine service from your own strength and your own merit. The way to do that is through critical thinking, through understanding it yourself, through considering the teachings of your teacher to the point that you can solve problems on your own through brainstorming and deliberating. You can understand and appreciate the teachings of your teacher even when your teacher is no longer there. By the way, this instruction was given to Aaron the high priest because it is the responsibility of the mentor, not the mentee, to guide the student to self-motivated service through critical thinking. It's Aaron who was commanded to lift up the candle flames. Aaron was commanded to do that because you needed a gifted teacher who's able to inspire his students to not be students, but to shatter their glass ceiling and to reinvent themselves from being followers to becoming leaders on their own right. The Rebbe was a shining example, is a shining example of this kind of leadership, as we heard moments ago from former Chief Rabbi of England, Jonathan Sachs. It was in his opening statement in 1951 when the Rebbe accepted the mantle of leadership of the Chabad Lubavitch movement as the seventh Rebbe of this extraordinary movement. The Rebbe made it very, very clear that he is not going to spoon feed anyone. You've got to work this out on your own. Listen to the Rebbe's own words in 1951. Listen up, fellow Jews, said the Rebbe. The Rebbes of Chabad demanded that their Hasidim take personal action and not rely on their Rebbe. After all, even God himself does not impress piety or proper conduct upon anyone. We must all work, therefore, with the entirety of our bodies and our souls, not just with our hands and our feet, but with our hearts and our minds, with our critical thinking. I will not withhold my assistance, God forbid. I will help to the best of my ability, said the Rebbe, but I cannot do the work on your behalf. Of what good will it be for me to publish Hasidic discourses, to sing Hasidic songs and say l'chaim at Hasidic gatherings if you all don't do your part? The Rebbe, my father-in-law, would say, the previous Rebbe, don't be delusional. This is the Rebbe's opening statement. Each one of us must personally transform our foolish tendencies and material passion into holiness because no one else can do it on our behalf. The Rebbe demanded from us self-motivation. The Rebbe demands that we stand on our own 2 feet in our service of God, and indeed, as Hasidim of the Rebbe. You are not supposed to simply follow blind faith. You need to have critical thinking. Hear it now in this beautiful video segment as the Rebbe speaks to 2 worldly individuals. One of them was Yehuda Avner, who is advisor to 4 or 5 prime ministers of Israel, a famous diplomat, and the other, a judge in Miami. Take a look at this.
אני אגיד לך מה אני משתדל לעשות. I will tell you what I try to do. I'll give straight away the English translation. He said, Rabbi Yehuda, imagine you're looking at a cupboard. And I tell you, open that cupboard. You open the cupboard. And you see inside a candle. But I tell you, that is not a candle. That is a lump of wax with a piece of string in between. Musai hashavo v'hachut nehofchim lener. When does the wax and the wick become a candle? Ka'asher ato mevi lahava el hachut. When you bring a flame to the wick. As hashava v'hachut nehofchim lener. Lemo, that is to say, they fulfill the purpose for which they were created. That is what I try to do. Shekol ish v'isha yekayim es hamatorah shelamana heim nivro. That every man and woman should fulfill the purpose for which they were created. When you bring the flame to the wick is inside, and that is the soul, then it brings to life the body, which is the wax, and the body of the soul fulfill the purpose for which they were created. And that is by the Esha Torah, the fire of Torah. And then, this I can say, he began to talk to me about the Sixth Fleet in the Mediterranean in detail, and about how it would be of strategic advantage to Israel if we could persuade Washington to establish a supply base for the Sixth Fleet in Haifa. It's 2:10 in the morning. I rise. He escorts me to his door, takes me by the hand, both hands, and I say to him, Ha'im Rebbe hidlik et haner sheli? Has the Rebbe lit my candle? He said, no. Nosati lecha es hagafur, rak ato yachol lahadlik es haner shelcha. I have given you the match. Only you can light your own candle.
Much bless you to go from strength to strength. Tomorrow I'm meeting with the Federal Sentencing Commission, and I'm going to tell them your views on imprisonment. You support my views also, not only support my views. Yes. Support them. Yes, and the prisoners. Yeah, and God Almighty bless you to go from strength to strength, and to reach the time that there will be no prison, only preventive education, to not to let people to go astray from the right way. That's what I'm going to tell them. Yeah, God Almighty bless you. But you tell them as your personal views also. And yours and mine too. Yeah. Thank you very much. Yeah. Good service.
In these two beautiful video segments, we see how the Rebbe demanded from ordinary people that they deliver the goods on their own, that you come to the conclusion on your own. To Yehuda Avner, the advisor to the four Israeli prime ministers, the Rebbe said, I can give you the match, but only you can light your own candle. To this judge from Miami, the Rebbe said, it's one thing for you to report my views, and I hope you agree with my views, but I hope that you share them, that you actually feel them yourself, that you agree with them, because that is what it's all about. I don't want to spoon feed you my wisdom. My goal is that your wisdom should understand and be part of this equation as well. And we find this phenomenon of empowering one's students to think for themselves in every aspect of the Rebbe's extraordinary tenure as leader of the Chabad Lubavitch movement. You see, the Rebbe's, one of the great revolutions of the Rebbe was the 5,000-6,000 emissaries and Chabad centers that are around the world. And you'll notice that most people think that we were sent as shluchim. You know, I'm the shliach to Palm Beach Gardens in Florida, and someone in headquarters sent me and my wife to Palm Beach Gardens, but that's not really the case. A tiny percentage of the shluchim, of the emissaries of the Rebbe, were actually asked to go to their locations. The overwhelming majority, well over 99% of the shluchim, asked on their own for the merit of being sent on shlichus, of being able to represent the Rebbe in the various locations that they were, whether it was California or our grandparents in Italy or elsewhere across the world, the vast majority asked on their own. The Rebbe didn't want to force this upon anyone. You, on your own, have to come to the understanding and appreciation that this is what you want, then I will be able to empower you. But I'm not going to send you and make you do something that's against your will. And in fact, as we learned earlier from that quote from National Geographic, it was after the Rebbe's passing in 1994 that the overwhelming majority of Chabad houses were opened. It was only a small percentage of Chabad houses that are open today that were around before 1994. The vast majority were opened after 1994, including our own Chabad in Palm Beach Gardens, opened only 15 years ago in 2006. The Rebbe wanted us to do it with our own understanding. That is leadership, where your students become leaders on their own instead of merely following orders. And you know, another fascinating thing about Chabad houses is that we're not funded by headquarters. Each and every Chabad house is funded on its own. We have to raise our own funds from our own communities. Why? Because this empowers our communities to feel a sense of responsibility and a sense of ownership, a sense of belonging, of possession of our own Chabad houses, of our own shuls. When Joe the plumber is a supporter to his local Chabad house, then he feels like an owner, like a partner in the Chabad house, as opposed to someone who just shows up one day to a beautiful building, all guns blazing, traveling at full throttle. The Chabad house was sent from headquarters with everything, including the kitchen sink. Then everybody that attends the Chabad house is merely a spectator. Is nothing more than an attendee. But by opening Chabad houses from the grassroots, my wife and I showed up in Palm Beach Gardens in a rented car from our wedding savings, and we rented a house with our wedding savings, and we sent out flyers advertising high holiday services, and slowly but surely we built programs, events, and lectures to be able to draw the community around us, and together we sat around the table and we worked out how we were going to build our own indigenous community by the strength and leadership and guidance of our own constituents. That is empowerment, not only of the Rebbe's Hasidim, but of all of the students of the Rebbe, including the secular Jews in the far out communities where the shluchim, the emissaries, operate. And in fact, the Rebbe gave very interesting instruction to each Chabad house. There's no real global compliance when it comes to Chabad houses. The Rebbe gave very interesting guidance as to how the shluchim, the emissaries, the Chabad rabbis, should conduct themselves in each of their respective locations. In a fascinating talk in 1988, the Rebbe said as follows: the following is my general response to the emissaries, to the shluchim, who have doubts or questions as to which methods are appropriate or advisable in the course of implementing their shlichus, their ambassadorship of disseminating Judaism and the wellsprings of Hasidic teachings. My answer is that they should act upon their own understanding of the situation. A judge must rule based on the evidence before him, quoting the Talmud. In every location, said the Rebbe, according to its unique needs and circumstances. This is how the Rebbe wants us to operate. Not in a way that we need the Rebbe in order to survive. In 1988, it was almost as if the Rebbe was foreseeing a time when he would no longer be able to lead us the way he was for 44 years. The Rebbe foresaw a time where we would be living in a spiritual darkness without a leader. And the Rebbe wanted us to be able to stand on our own 2 feet, to be able to find the answers within ourselves in a stunning encounter that the Rebbe had with a non-Lubavitcher, a non-Chabadnik. Take a look at what the Rebbe had to say to someone who was seeking his advice, somebody who needed guidance right here.
I had specific questions about the direction of my psychology career. And also, I wasn't sure at that point for my children. At that point, my oldest was about starting school. She's 5 or 6 years old. And we weren't sure about chinuch for the children. There were most of us at chinuch in Silver Spring, in that area in Washington. We weren't sure about that. And like everybody else, I guess, I had my own questions of emunah and bitochen. some were philosophical questions, but some were really Lamaisa kinds of questions. And I wasn't sure about many things. I was in a stage of uncertainty. I was then in my very early 30s, so maybe I was too young for a midlife crisis, or maybe I just got the midlife crisis earlier than some people. And I was probably depressed because of this, or just in general. I wasn't sure where to go. I called him up from the house, my apartment in Silver Spring, and I got through immediately to the Rabbi. And in the background, he answered the phone. Oh, hello, who's this? In English, if I'm not mistaken. And the Rebbe said from the distance, I know it was the Rebbe's voice because I knew the Rebbe's voice. Wer ruft, wer redt? So he asked me, wer ruft? So I said, ich bin Ayid from Maryland, from Silver Spring, Maryland. Why are you calling? I didn't say my name. He says, why are you calling? So I told him, I have questions about my decisions I have to make, about my career. I spoke to him in English. About my career. I have questions in Emunah. I'm a person with many, many questions. I'm a very, very uncertain stage of my life. And I would like to ask the Rebbe certain questions about decisions I have to make. I use the word uncertainty and decisions. So as I was talking, the Rabbi was like paraphrasing what I was saying on the phone. I imagine so that the Rebbe should hear. He's saying, oh, decisions, Namuna, and professional choices, things like that. And I could hear the Rebbe say in the background, Zogim as es is do Ayid in Maryland, zu wem soll reden. And der Yid heißt Whiner. So the Rebbe said to me, did you overhear what the Rebbe said? I didn't believe my ears, all right, because I knew for sure I didn't say my name. I wasn't going to say my name unless I was directly asked, and no one ever asked, what's your name? So he said, did you hear what the Rebbe said? So I said, no. I wanted to hear it again. He said, the Rebbe said that there's he said, he quoted the Rebbe verbatim in Yiddish, as ist du a Yid in Maryland, zu wem sollt reden, sein Nomen is Whiner. So I told the Rabbi, my Nomen is Whiner. So I heard the Rebbe say, Bazoi soll wissen sein, has amol darf man reden zu sich. And the Rabbi then was like stunned. I mean, you can hear, he just stopped, he short breath. He said, the Rebbe said that sometimes it's best to talk to yourself. Is your name Weinreb? So I said, yeah, my name is Weinreb, but maybe the Rebbe means a different Weinreb. So he says, no, if the Rebbe says talk to Weinreb, you got to talk to Weinreb. So I thanked him very much. Obviously, since 1971, I've had many, many questions about many, many different things. And unfailingly, whenever I have any kind of question, even if it's a question in halacha, or a question in, should I learn this masechta, this man, or that masechta, whatever, or if it's a deeper question about shidduchim, my family, my own personal decisions, before I speak with anybody else, I put myself aside some time, and I study something to do with the Rebbe, Lakutei Sichos, or something. To kind of connect again, and I think about it myself, and I listen to my, whatever you want to call it, my inner voice. I call it, and it's very, very helpful. And I've encouraged other people, before you go asking this and that other person, whoever it is, a Rebbe, a Rav, first talk to yourself. Just listen to what you have to say about it. Sometimes that's the best answer.
Now that was a fascinating concept between Wiener and Wiener and what the component is. You can and you don't need anybody else. You can use it on what we do so far is that whether it's in a relationship with our Rebbe, with our Hebrew, and whether it's in a relationship with God, turning off our brain in the service of God is not the right way to do it. That's an immature approach to it. The way you have to go for it is by turning on our. The way that you have to go about our relationship with God and with our leaders is by understanding. You don't hear me? I see the sound is a little garbled. Can you hear me now? Testing, testing, 1, 2, 3. Testing, testing, 1, 2, 3. Oy vey, I don't know why this is muffled.
It's better now.
Okay, thank you, Yosef. That was like the voice of God there. Can you hear me better now? Friends, can you hear me on the, if you could post your comments, tell me if you can hear me. Testing, testing, 1, 2, 3. Good now. Thank you, Alyssa. Appreciate it very, very much. Oh, look at that. I saw your comment on the screen. That's interesting. We're actually using a new format. I just want to thank Mr. Yosef Figelstock, who is part of the JLI team of production, who is helping me here with this broadcast. Thank you very much, Yosef. Very much appreciated. I don't know what I would do without you. So it's a slightly different platform than we're using today, and I'm just getting the hang of it. So thank you for bearing with me here. What I was starting to say, friends, is that in our relationship with our leaders, in our relationship with our Rebbe, in our relationship with our God, turning off our intelligence is not the right way to go. That is an immature approach to religion. Critical thinking is a vital approach to religion and to Hasidism and to how we approach our leaders in general. But the big question we have to ask ourselves is, how do you know that the critical thinking, that the conclusions, that the problems that that the solving of the problems that you come to is the right way to go? How will you know that what you're thinking, your conclusions, is the right way to go? We just heard from Mr. Rabbi Whiner now that when it came to marrying off his children, he had to make his own decisions and he came to their own conclusions. How did he know that he wasn't having some incorrect conclusion? Moses was told by God, send on your own critical thinking. I'm not telling you what to do. I'm not going to spoon feed you. How did Moses know that his conclusion was the right conclusion to send the spies? In fact, how do we know that we don't have the same result as the 10 spies? 10 of those 12 spies in the Torah came back with a very negative report, and they obviously were a failure. Their critical thinking was wrong. Only 2 of those spies came back with the correct response. So what can we do as ordinary people, you and I? What can we do to ensure that the conclusions that we come to with our intelligence, when we're not just following orders, but when we're considering and deliberating, that those conclusions are in fact consistent with the will of God, just like the Mishnah told us in Ethics of the Fathers earlier. It said, make his will into your will. Merge your will with the will of God. But how do I know that my will is going to be the same as God's, and that my conclusions are not going to be different from the conclusions of God? And here, my friends, we're introduced to something which really blew my mind. When I learned this idea, it really was unbelievable. I love this whole concept, and I hope that you'll be able to relate to it too. The Rebbe teaches us that the only way that our critical thinking will lead to a healthy relationship with God is if our critical thinking is preceded by humility, by an attitude of surrender before God. As the Jewish people said, first Nasta, we will do, yes sir, and only afterwards we will comprehend. Remember that God said, who revealed the secret to my children? And I said I was going to explain it later. This is what God was talking about, according to the Rebbe's explanation. That wisdom is never truly objective. Critical thinking is never truly objective. It depends and is influenced by the context of its origin. Only when we come in with a context, with a foundation of humility, of surrender, Nasta we will do, then the critical thinking, the Knishmas that we will understand that follows will be one that is consistent with the will of God. But if your critical thinking is not founded on a foundation of humility, then it could go in any direction. Just like a tree, if planted on straight ground, will grow straight. If planted on crooked ground, will go crooked. Let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. The Torah tells us that you're not allowed to give a bribe to righteous and wise judges. The Torah calls them righteous and wise. And even they shouldn't accept a bribe. Why not? Clearly, the bribe is not going to cause them to lie in their judgment, in their verdict, because then they wouldn't be wise and then they wouldn't be righteous. The Rebbe explains that what a bribe does to a judge is that it very subtly, inconspicuously changes his allegiance. It makes the judge feel like he owes something to the one that gave him the bribe, and therefore the critical analysis that the judge will make, what seems to be objective thinking, will actually lean in favor of the one who gave him the bribe. If you've received a bribe, then your heart pledges allegiance to the one that gave you the bribe. You feel indebted to the person that gave you that. And now the critical thinking that follows is on a crooked foundation, one that is not truly objective, one that isn't truly true to the subject, but is slanted and leaning towards the one that gave you the bribe. Think about it for a moment. Why is it that college professors have such an anti-Israel stance? Why is it that scientists have such an anti-God stance? Is science ideologically opposed to God? Think about this for a moment. Does science preclude the existence of God? The answer is no. When you study science, and good Torah are in perfect harmony. But why is it that so many scientists come to a rational conclusion that doesn't allow for the existence of God? It's because the environment in which they're coming from is one of Fira, is one of heresy and apostasy, where there is no room for God. There is no such thing as objective wisdom. Wisdom is always influenced by the foundation and the context in which it was conceived. Think about this a moment. We're living now within 4 months of our national election, one of the most highly polarized times in American history. You give the same set of information, the same facts to a Democrat and to a Republican. The same exact fact. What's going to happen? One of them will come to the conclusion that President Trump is an angel, and the other one will come to the conclusion that President Trump is a demon. The same set of facts will be interpreted in two different ways based upon the context in which we analyze those pieces of information, which is the reason why there can't be any normal dialogue these days between the polarized political groups, because the facts don't matter anymore. They're interpreting the facts in different ways depending on the context in which they were conceived. That's why when you listen to cable news, whether it's Fox or ABC, NBC, CNN, it's larger than life. It sort of makes this impression upon you with all the showmanship and the music and the official, the whole thing. It makes it look so official that it clouds our analysis, our rational analysis of politics. And it becomes an echo chamber. Then when you watch one set of news, you're coming to an analysis, to critical analysis, which leads in one direction, and you're watching the other side of the political spectrum will lead you to the opposite conclusion because of the foundation in which the news was presented to you. They try to say that it's facts, not opinion, but in reality, we all know that the cable news networks are all teaching us specific ideologies that they're trying to promote. Same thing with Hollywood. If you're influenced by Netflix or by movies or by Hollywood, that will cloud your judgment, your analysis, your critical analysis and thinking of romance and love. And now we can understand why the Rebbe said to the shluchim, to the emissaries, that of the Chabad houses in 1988, you guys can work this out yourself. You don't need to turn to me anymore. Because what the Rebbe was saying to them was, look at you emissaries. You've devoted your life to representing the Rebbe. You've devoted your life. You've picked your families, your wives and children out. You've moved to Vietnam, to Vladivostok, to places that you can't even pronounce. There are Chabad rabbis that live at the foot of Machu Picchu and near the top of Mount Everest. You've devoted your lives to your teacher, to your Rebbe. It is within this powerful foundation of commitment and devotion that your critical thinking now will certainly be aligned with the one who sent you, with the Rebbe. That's what the Rebbe was telling the Shluchim. You know, when Louise Hager, a woman from England, once asked the Rebbe for a certain personal matter, the Rebbe said to her, you can make that decision yourself. So she didn't feel that she had the wherewithal to really make that decision herself. She had a personal relationship with the Rebbe's wife, the Rebbetzin Chaya Mushka. She called up the Rebbetzin and she said, you know, the Rebbe told me that I can think of the solution myself, but I'm really not comfortable, so maybe you can ask him on my behalf. And the Rebbetzin, the Rebbe's wife, said to Louise, said that if the Rebbe told you that you can think of the answer yourself, it means that you can and must think of the answer yourself. What the Rebbe was obviously telling this woman is that she had sufficient commitment and devotion to her Rebbe. She had a healthy foundation of commitment to the Rebbe. It was, I guess, evident in the fact that she was turning to the Rebbe for guidance with humility. It was with that context that she was approaching the Rebbe. The Rebbe said, with that context, you have a healthy foundation of humility. Now the critical thinking that will come out of this will be one that is consistent with my analysis. Your conclusion and my conclusion are really going to be the same. And this, my friends, is the reason why we can finally understand, before we understand the Rebbe's answer to Herbert Wiener, to the Reform Rabbi, we can finally understand why it was that at Mount Sinai, God gives every Jew not one, but two crowns. One was for we will do, surrendering our intelligence. And two, for the second word was we will understand, we will comprehend, for critical thinking. Because both of these are vital in our relationship with God. It's not enough to just have critical thinking to power our passion and our endurance and our clarity in our intimate relationship with God and our holistic relationship with God. It's not enough to have critical thinking in our relationship with God. We must be founded upon a foundation of humility and devotion and surrendering our intelligence to God. The Nasta, we will do, yes, sir, because only when we have that foundation will the subsequent critical thinking be aligned with the critical thinking of God, to the point that we can reach what the ethics of the fathers told us: merge your will with the will of God. That's only possible when you do the sequence of first preceding I will do, we will do, and before we will listen. And I want to point out to you, if we look closely again at what the Talmud said about those two crowns, the Talmud said like this: when the Jews preceded we will do to we will understand, that's when they got the two crowns. It's not just about we will do and we will listen, surrender and critical thinking in our relationship with God. It's particularly about the sequence where our surrender, our humility comes before our critical thinking. The only way we can truly come to a critical thinking that is consistent with the will of God is when we have the humility before God to say, God, I'll do whatever you tell me, and then we will understand. You see, this was why Moses was able to send the spies, because Moses was a man who was humble before God like no one else. The Torah tells us no one else was as humble as Moses was before God. He was the perfect person whose critical thinking would align with the thinking of God. The problem was that the 12 men that he chose, unfortunately, didn't live up to the standards and expectations that their Rebbe, that Moses put in them. Moses empowered them to say, use your wisdom to find the best way into the land. Two of those spies, Joshua and Caleb, they came back immaculate, to the perfect description. They got full marks. But the other 10 spies came back with a negative response. Their critical thinking did not align with that of God. They rejected their the entire notion of entering the promised land, and the reason was because they lacked that humility. They obviously were not as devoted to God, not as humble before God as they made themselves out to be. It's only in this sequence that we can reach our aspiration of merging our will with the will of God to understand what we are already committed to doing. And now, friends, we can finally understand the Rebbe's response, the Rebbe's enigmatic response to Herbert Wiener, to the Reform Rabbi. When he asked the Rebbe, aren't your Hasidim a little too devoted? It seems that they've turned off their intelligence when they ask you so many questions about all the trivial matters in their lives. It seems that the Hasidim have forfeited the most prized possession of a human being, which is Bechira, freedom of choice. And now when the Rebbe responds by saying that they are not weak, they are strong people, and the proof is in the pudding, that they're able to influence their very harsh and hostile environments and not be influenced by their harsh and spiritually hostile environments. It seems almost that the Rebbe was deflecting from answering the question. But now we can finally understand. We can finally understand that what the Rebbe was saying is, yes, they are devoted. They're devoted to their leader, but that's not the be-all and end-all. They are critical thinkers, as evidenced by their tremendous achievements. It is their devotion to their leader that gives them the strength, the guidance, to ensure that their subsequent critical thinking, which they obviously have, will be aligned with the one who sent them, will be aligned with the will of God. And that's why the Rebbe was not at all deflecting from answering this Reform Rabbi. Rabbi Wiener, what the Rebbe was saying is that their devotion to me, to their Rebbe, the Rebbe never spoke about himself, he was so humble. It is their devotion to their Rebbe that enables them, that empowers them to be the extraordinary leaders that they have clearly become. What the Rebbe was telling Herbert Wiener is that leadership is not monolithic. It's not that you either surrender or you're thinking for yourself. You're either surrendering or you are problem solving. It's not that. The true way to problem solving is on a solid foundation of commitment and devotion. Nasta before Nishma, we will do before we will understand, just like the Jews did at Mount Sinai. This was the secret that God expressed surprise as to who revealed the secret to my sons. The Medrash tells us that this was a secret delivered to God, to the Jewish people, because herein lies the secret to our ability to have a healthy relationship with God and to live successful and wholesome and meaningful lives in the fulfillment of our purpose in this world. When we face forks in our road, when we face junctions and problems and challenges in our road, and we have no one to turn to, we've finally been given the recipe to be able to find what God wants us to do. On a solid bedrock foundation of humility and devotion and commitment, we can build our critical thinking to know that the conclusions that we come to will certainly be consistent with that of God Almighty up in heaven who's watching us. And I find it so interesting that Rabbi Whiner, from the video that we just saw, he said that whenever he has a crossroads in his life, many years have passed since 1971, he said, and I've had many, many dilemmas and questions, but each time that I have a question, here's what he does. He doesn't just stop and think. If you listen closely to the video, here's what he said. He said, I first sit down and I open some teachings of the Rebbe. Likutei Sichos is the Rebbe's Manye opus. It is the Rebbe's collected, edited works on all the Torah portions of the Torah, 39 volumes. He says he would first study some of the Rebbe's teachings. When you study, learning is the teacher talking to you, right? Studying Torah is God talking to you. Prayer is you talking to God. So when you're learning teachings, you're listening to God. You're learning the teachings of God. And now you're humbling yourself before God. This is Nasta, we will do. Here I am exhibiting surrender and humility. I'm accepting the will of God. And after I've experienced a session of study of humility, now I am able to think rationally for myself. And this, interestingly, was exhibited, this trait of leadership, this balance between surrender and empowerment, between humility and critical thinking, is something that we find in the Rebbe's own relationship with his Rebbe. This is paradigm shift. It is transforming our perceptions of reality. It's lesson 4 here. We're talking about the Rebbe's approach to religion and leadership. We find that in the Rebbe's own relationship with his Rebbe, his father-in-law, the 6th Chabad Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson. The Rebbe would constantly refer to his father-in-law as the Rebbe of our generation. He would constantly refer all questions that were sent to him to his father-in-law's grave. He would write 3 letters, an acronym for I will take this message, this prayer request, and bring it to my father-in-law, our Rebbe, at his graveside in Queens, New York, at the Ohel. The Rebbe's humility to his master, to his teacher, to his Rebbe was unmatched and unsurpassed. It's like no humility we've ever seen before. Yet, was the Rebbe weak? The Rebbe's strength of character was extraordinary and exemplary. This morning I gave a class on youtube.com/Jewish Gardens showing how Hosni Mubarak, president of Egypt, asked an Israeli journalist, what does the Lubavitcher Rebbe want from me? The Rebbe fearlessly spoke truth to power as he confronted prime ministers and presidents, as he confronted the Lenin and Stalin and the leaders of communist Russia, as the Rebbe spoke about to United States presidents and corresponded with leaders of the free world. The Rebbe had no weakness of character. The Rebbe was extraordinarily strong in character, leading the Jewish world in unprecedented measures of leadership, where the rest of the Jewish world was constantly in awe and in shock of the Rebbe's constant reinvention and initiatives that he was bringing to the Jewish world. I mean, the entire fact that we have almost over 5,000 Chabad centers around the world today, bringing the Rebbe's most gifted and talented students, leaders, to the farthest corners of the world, is an extraordinary revolution, the likes of which the Jewish people have never seen in our entire history. Here we see the Rebbe's balance. On the one hand, extreme humility to his teacher, to his Rebbe, and at the same time, extraordinary and ambitious leadership, strength of character like we've never been before. The Rebbe's surrender to his Rebbe was his rudder, was his foundation, so that his character, his critical thinking and analysis would be able to flow from that. Applying this wisdom, my friends, we have to realize that in our relationship with God, we have to have both surrender and humility and devotion, as well as critical thinking, consideration, brainstorming, thinking for ourselves. We have to have Nasta, we will do, as well as Nishma, we will understand. In fact, we read in the Song of the Sea, which we read every morning in Azia Shir, it's called. It says, this is the God of my fathers, and I will adore him. The God of my ancestors, and I will exalt him. The Rebbe explains, when this is my God, this is my God. If it's my God, the God that I comprehend, appreciate, and understand, when my relationship with God is the product of my own comprehension and knowledge, then ve'anvehu, then it is I and he. He and I are united in a meaningful relationship. The word ve'anvehu means anivahu, he and I, then we are intimate. When it's my God, when I fathom God and appreciate and understand God, then we have a meaningful and intimate relationship. For my understanding of him permeates the emotions of the heart. If, however, I do not comprehend the divine, and I depend on the faith of my family tradition, I do the mitzvah because that's what my ancestors told me to do, because it's the God of my father. Then I just exalt him. Then God remains exalted and beyond me, and I remain emotionally distant from him. We have to ask ourselves, friends, which parts of your divine service are lacking in my God? Which parts of your service of God do you do because that's what your parents told you to do? Or because that's what your teachers told you to do? Do you lay tefillin because you understand the meaning of tefillin? Or do you do it because that's what Jews do? Do you have a bris on the 8th day for your grandchild? Because that's just the way we Jews do it, but because you truly appreciate and understand the meaning of the bris, the meaning of the kosher food, the meaning of the Shabbos and the Yontiv, and every other nuance of the 613 commandments. Which parts of our divine service, of your divine service, require more nishma, require more understanding, we will comprehend. And on the flip side, which part of your divine service needs more Nasta, we will do, needs more surrender, needs more commitment and devotion. And when it comes to your mentees, I see someone posted a question here that he didn't want to mentor anybody. You should. You should mentor people. And you should encourage them to be the best that they can be, to bring out the best within themselves. Empower your mentees to be greater than you. The Talmud tells us that two people a person is never jealous of: your son, your child, and your students. Empower your students to be more powerful than you, like the Rebbe who created no followers, only leaders. Are you demanding of your students enough commitment in the beginning of their spiritual journey? And are you demanding of them enough critical thinking to stand on their own 2 feet? Or are you requiring them to be reliant on you all along? Does your therapist require you to come back to them all the time? Is it perpetuating the therapy that keeps your marriage wholesome? Or is your therapist giving you the tools that you need to no longer need your therapist? Friends, this approach of leadership and religion is not anything foreign to Chabad, to the movement. You see, the word Chabad means idea, understanding, and application or realization. Chabad is empowering our intellect to be able to serve God. Not only to serve God because I believe. Chabad is about serving God because I understand. This is the essence of what the Chabad movement is all about. It is about empowering our students and empowering ourselves, not to just turn our brains off as we serve God. Anyone who thinks that religion is for lemmings, that religion is for followers, doesn't begin to understand what God wants from us. Telling them religion, I'm sorry, I was looking at a comment from Kujam, which seems to be correct. By telling them to be their own mentor and being the best mentor. That's actually a very good point that you're making there, Kujam. Wonder where you're from. So, religion is about a relationship with God. And a relationship with God, when you're married to your wife, you're not a slave or a servant to your wife. You're relating to your wife wholesomely and holistically, with your brain, with your heart, with your hands, with your feet, in every respect. That's what an intimate relationship is. And religion is not just about following orders. Religion is a romantic relationship with our lover in heaven. God wants all of me, warts and all. He wants every aspect of you, the good, the bad, and the ugly. He wants your critical thinking as well. If God only had you following orders like a soldier, it would be nice, but it's not an intimate relationship. God wants to be married to you, and to do that, he needs you to understand this as well. And just as a closing point, I want to say that we've spoken earlier in this course about the purpose of creation, which is the doctrine of a home for God. That the reason that God created us was because he wanted us to build a home for him in this world which is spiritually dark. In a world where God is hidden, that's where God wants us to make a home for him through sanctifying the physical object that we encounter in the service of God. Using the money that we earn for charity, the food that we eat, we sanctify with a blessing. Designating our business in a way that we don't work in Shabbat. By using all the properties of this physical world, we are creating a home for God in this physical world. How can you possibly make a home for God if you don't use your brain? If your relationship with God is merely about following orders, to do as you're told, then you're excluding the most precious piece of real estate from God's home. The most precious piece of real estate upon this earth is your mind, is your brain, is your consciousness and your awareness. If you are only following orders and you're not thinking the way God wants you to think, if you're not understanding and appreciating and comprehending the mitzvahs that God has commanded us, and thinking the way that God wants you to think, just like God empowered Moses to think on his own, then you're excluding that great piece of real estate, your mind, your consciousness, your awareness, from the presence of God's home. And with this, I'd just like to conclude with a final quote from the Rebbe here. we cause God the greatest pleasure imaginable. When we intellectually grasp the Torah and the mitzvahs, this is the type of service that God treasures most. God's desire for a dwelling place in the lower world requires all elements of the lower realms to be an abode for and in concert with God. When we negate our own understandings and feelings and choose to do as God commands, though such behavior expresses tremendous subservience to God, it also demonstrates that God's will has not fully permeated us. For our intellectual and emotional faculties have yet to become an abode for God. To fully realize God's desire, our entirety must become an abode for holiness. And this occurs only when our minds comprehend God's plan. In summary, friends, we've learned two beautiful ideas, two beautiful paradigm shifts that the Rebbe has taught us today. Number one, if you're serving God without your brain, you're doing it totally wrong. And like Corey's pointing out, you're missing out on the true beauty and joy of Yiddishkeit. The second thing that the Rebbe taught us here tonight is that wisdom is never truly objective. It always is influenced by outside factors, by the context and the footing upon which it was founded. You know, there were two salespersons, two shoe salesmen. They were sent to an island, a vacation island. Both of them were sent to sell shoes on the island. After 2 days on the island, 2 telegrams come into headquarters. One telegram comes in from the first salesman, says, "Don't send any shoes to this island. There is no hope for selling shoes here. Everybody here walks barefoot." The second telegram from the second salesman says, "Send every last shoe that you have in stock. Send the orders, rush the orders, order more orders, because nobody here wears shoes. Everybody here walks barefoot." The conclusion that these two salespeople came to was from the very same analysis of the facts. One, of course, was an optimist, and the other was a pessimist. One viewed it as an opportunity to sell shoes because nobody sells shoes. The other felt that it was a pessimist. He felt that this was no way to sell shoes because everybody walks barefoot. Our wisdom is always subjective. Just like the bribe of the righteous person whose critical thinking will come to the conclusion in favor of the one who bribed them. We have to remember that critical thinking alone is not enough. It's got to be founded on that secret that God gave to his children, on the secret of being preceded by humility, by devotion, and by faith. It's only when we can make the pledge to say, "Hashem, I am here for you. I will follow your orders, and only afterwards will I try to comprehend and appreciate and understand what you're telling me." It's then that we will truly be able to merge in a magnificent, intimate relationship with God, where our will is merged with the will of God. Not like that immature level of the ethics of the fathers, nullifying your will before God, but like the higher level, the one that Moses rejoiced over, the level of merge your will, make your will the same as that of God. And the way that we do that is by having our critical thinking based on a foundation of devotion and commitment. Friends, when we need to face our challenges today, we've got a lot of questions. How do we deal with the quarantine? How do we deal with the pandemic? How do we deal with social distancing? How do we do high holidays during a pandemic? And all these other great questions that we have. If we can learn and apply the secrets of first exhibiting devotion, first exhibiting humility before God, through studying, doing a mitzvah, living a lifestyle of commitment to God, it's then that the rational thinking that follows will be one that is aligned with the will of God. You have the power to solve your problems. Sometimes you need to just speak to yourself in order to solve your problems. You can do this. And one final anecdote was when the Rebbe was teaching his teachings. They were, on Shabbat, you couldn't record the teachings. Many hours of teachings were recorded by the human tape recorders, by Hasidim of the Rebbe that had the gift of being able to remember hours of the Rebbe's teachings word for word. And when they transcribed the teachings, sometimes they had questions of understanding what the Rebbe really was talking about. In one case, Rabbi Simon Jacobson tells a story of how he wrote a question into the Rebbe of comprehension. He couldn't understand what the Rebbe was saying. And the Rebbe's response was stunning. The Rebbe said, "The talk that I spoke was all about empowering the students. It was all about understanding things for yourself. and you want me to spoon feed you the answer to the question? This is the extraordinary leadership of the Rebbe. Indeed, the Rebbe had no followers. The Rebbe only empowers leaders for us to bring out the best within ourselves, and our devotion and humility to the Rebbe is only the rudder, is only the catalyst to allow us to thrive with our thinking that follows. I look forward to seeing you again next week, next Thursday night, same time, same place, 8 p.m. on Facebook of the JLI, as well as YouTube of the JLI. And I encourage you to send me an email with your questions and comments. I would love to hear from you. Send me an email to rabbi@jewishgardens.com. That's rabbi@jewishgardens.com. You can follow me, follow our daily Torah classes at youtube.com/Jewish Gardens. That's youtube.com/Jewish Gardens. Every morning, every weekday morning at 8:30 a.m., youtube.com/Jewish Gardens, and at facebook.com/Jewish Gardens. That's facebook.com/Jewish Gardens. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you for joining me here today, friends. Been a great pleasure. Thank you, Kujam, for your nice comment about passion. Good message over there. I wasn't able to see a lot of these comments earlier, so thank you for sharing them. Interesting theory. I'm just looking for anything interesting. Love it from Corrine. Anyways, thank you very much, everybody. Over and out. It's been wonderful. I really appreciate studying with you. Thank you very much. Shalom.